Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night, depending on what it is you're doing right now. This is Understanding Human Communication, and this is going to be chapter 4, Understanding Culture and Co-Cultures. And I'll just apologize ahead of time to you. I've already figured out that some of the chapters, in addition to being rearranged, some of the chapters don't read exactly the same. And because I only have the 13th edition, that's all I can really lecture with right now. Culture, of course, is the language, the definition of the language, values, beliefs, traditions, and customs people share. And then within these encompassing cultures are co-cultures. And they're members of that larger culture, but they have their own set of language, values, beliefs, traditions, and things like that as well. Interaction among members of different co-cultures is called intergroup communication. Some co-cultures present within our society include age, race and ethnicity, sexual orientation, physical disability, language, religion, and of course, just activity, just hobbies and activities that we have that set us apart, that we have an interest in that other groups might not be interested in. A large part of how we think about communicating between cultures is a matter of salience and how much weight we attach to cultural characteristics. There are in-groups, groups in which we identify and are mostly connected. There are out-groups. These are views as different with whom we have no sense of affiliation. Now, there are in-groups and out-groups in high school, and this is not talking about that at all. This is talking about just in our own life. There are groups with which we do affiliate and which we do feel a connection to, and then there are groups that we don't. We cannot feel connected to every group that's out there. We can be accepting of and be, you know, try to communicate with it if the time comes and the point arrives where that's needed. But it's not a matter of trying to be a part of every group that there is. It's not possible. There are sometimes, the book points out that sometimes there are greater differences even within cultures than between them. And that does happen as well. Cultural values and norms, though, do shape our communication. The book talks about individualistic versus collectivistic cultures. An individualistic culture is one that values the individual, primary responsible individual helping themselves, whereas a collectivistic culture feels loyalties and obligations to one's extended family, community, and even the organization one works for. We value the individual in the United States. We are a much more individualistic culture to some extent. There are within the United States people and families that are a little bit more collectivistic. And I think that's also grown a lot in the last number of years through some of the economic trials and some of the epidemic, the pandemic that we've been dealing with. I think that has changed as well a little bit. But in certain Eastern cultures, Asian cultures, the collectivistic culture is dominant. Collectivistic societies produce team players. They don't produce superstars like individualistic cultures do. Going forward, talking about high and low context, really a way of saying the same thing. Low context cultures use language primarily to express their thoughts and feelings and ideas as clearly as possible. That's individualistic. High context rely heavily on subtle, often nonverbal cues to maintain social harmony. The collectivistic culture values the harmony of the whole over possibly even the rights of, but the expressiveness of the individual. Whereas in our culture, which is more individualistic, we value that individualistic rights and things like that over even the collective, the harmony of the whole and the things along that line. One of the things that the book talks about to have a difference in certain cultures is uncertainty avoidance. That's the degree which members of a culture feel threatened by ambiguous situations and how much they try to avoid them. Another thing that is a difference in cultures is power distance. The extent of the gap between social groups who possess resources influence and influencing those who don't. And we were for part of the United States, to some extent, through part of the United States history, we were uncomfortable with a big power distance. I think that power distance that we sort of almost denied at a certain point in time, we've started to acknowledge and understand more. They said that the top 5% or 10% of the people in the United States own 90% of the wealth of the United States. I don't know if you've seen that study, but that's been done. There's a great deal of power certain people do wield. Like it or not, more money means more power. More money means the ability to affect things around you. And so within our culture, we've been less comfortable with that, although I think that has changed. And in other cultures, they're much more comfortable with that gap in power distance, especially countries in which there's a dictator, whether they admit that it's a dictator or not. An election in which someone was an election, and in the election results, 99% of the people voted for the existing leader. It's probably didn't happen quite that way. Anyway, some beliefs about talk and silence. Asian cultures favor silence over excessive verbal expression of thoughts. There's a Taoist saying, one who speaks does not know, and one who knows does not speak. Very interesting way to put that. Talks about competitive and cooperative cultures, really the same way of saying individualistic and collectivistic. I'm not going to get into that right now. Talks about race and ethnicity. Race is a construct, and that's been used to explain differences between people. At times, some of those differences that have been attributed that have been really superficial, and stereotypical, and not necessarily even valid to a great extent. Ethnicity is more based on nationality, culture, religion, and some other perspective, whereas race is again, it's still constructed originally discussing people from different parts of the world and primarily based on skin color. Regional differences, accent. People of speakers of standard English are typically viewed as more competent and self-confident than others. Speakers with certain recognizable regional accents, such as the Southern accent, are oftentimes tagged with lower level jobs. And so that's with a less pronounced speech style than picked for higher level jobs. It's something that has happened in our society. Talks about sexual orientation and gender identity. The book talks about various ways that people represent themselves. There's a thing about a t-shirt which says, "Nobody knows I'm gay." And we cannot say that every person that we think of as gay, we know as gay, unless we know that they're gay for personal reasons. Nor can we say that every person that we think of as masculine, heterosexual is not gay. We don't know that all the time. There are people who say that, I can tell. You know, you think you can tell, fine. You may not be able to tell. Anyway, going forward, talks about religion, and we have a lot of things that have happened because of 9/11 and because of time since then, where there have been some radical Muslims who have formed terrorist organizations and tried to hurt other groups. And not the first religion that has gone out and tried to use violence and power or things along that line to hit other religions. We don't want to go back into it, but the times where people were told to convert to Christianity or die. We don't have, Christians don't necessarily have clean hands when it comes to this concept and this subject. There are differences in physical ability and disability. There are ways that we think about that, because sometimes we tend to think, well, this person has a disability. Is that something that affects them? Maybe more than it does. It could be that they're able to do more things than we might think of them as being able to do in spite of that. And so I've seen some stories about some amazing people as well. I've been blessed with, I have both legs, both arms, and look at the things this person's doing. And look at me, I'm sitting here on my couch. Anyway, age and generation, this is a very big gap. Age and generation they say there's a larger age gap now than there ever was. And that it takes fewer years to achieve that age gap. Whereas that age gap may have been 10 years at certain times in the past where there's sort of a gap in understanding. I have heard and read things that indicate it could be as low as 4 and 5 years, where there's tremendous differences in people based on age, just within a 4 or 5 year difference in being born. Of course, socioeconomic status does affect our culture as well. It's part of culture. We talk about developing interpersonal communication competence. One is just interacting more with people of different cultures. Maybe you don't, and you increase that amount of contact that you have with people. We start to understand each other a little bit better. We get along a little bit better. I've said this for many years now. Racism is not how we're born; it's what we're taught as we grow up. And isn't that a shame? And yet, there's so much of it. It boggles my mind that here in the 21st century, we still have racism. Really? We're going to keep teaching. How long are we going to keep teaching this to our kids? When are we going to stop and realize, well, I claim I'm a Christian, but I think that other people are less than me because of the color of their skin. Well, I'm not meaning to preach to anybody, but it's real clear, biblically speaking, it says that Jesus said, whatever you did to the very least of my brethren, you did to me. There are principles in other religions about treating each other equally as well. So anyway, tolerance for ambiguity is an issue. You have to be able to understand that people are different. Open-mindedness, just being open-minded. It's not having a prejudice about people from other cultures. That does a lot to create, help us be able to engage in conversations, get along with people from other cultures. There's a thing called ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is the belief, the thought that our culture is somehow inherently superior just because it's our culture. Guess what? It's not. It's not somehow inherently superior just because it's our culture. Going forward now talks about just developing some knowledge and skill and interacting with people. And the last part, and this is a great part, to end this thing about becoming better at intercultural communication, patience and perseverance. Just keep trying. We're not going to understand everything there is to know about somebody or necessarily sync and mesh immediately. Whereas if we keep trying, then that person might become a good friend. That is that's chapter 4, as I said. And I'm going to go to the next chapter, try to get another one done for you in the next day or two.